2nd, 2020, and I have a special guest today, a young man that I've been following since Billy Taylor said, "Hey, you heard this kid, Christian Sands?" Wow. That was, I guess, about 10 or so years ago, and since then, Christian graduated from, I believe, the Manhattan School of Music, and he's been playing a whole lot of piano with Christian McBride and other people. So before we get started here, I just need to make sure that we're okay on YouTube, and then we will begin today's session. Unfortunately, I'm a one-man band here, so sometimes it takes a minute to put this stuff together. Yesterday I did a show about Mulgrew Miller. Mulgrew was a good friend and really a remarkable guy who unfortunately left us much too early. But lo and behold, there are some incredible young musicians who've come up to step in and create in the same tradition that Mulgrew was part of. And certainly Christian is definitely part of that. So without further ado, hello, Christian Sands.
What's going on, man? How you doing?
I am well. Let me just clean up the picture a little bit here. Your gamma is a little too much.
A little saturated.
A little saturated, yeah, okay. So we did not speak before the program, so you folks are going to get kind of like a spontaneous presentation, which is not uncommon with jazz.
It is not.
Christian, let's talk a little bit about your background. You are from New Haven, Connecticut.
Yeah, originally New Haven, Connecticut. I started playing piano when I was about 1 year old. Yeah.
And was there a lot of music in the household? Is that how the piano thing came
There was. Funny enough, the piano thing, piano idea came not from my parents, even though they played a little. It actually came from a friend of the family who has since passed away. And she told my parents to put me in piano lessons when I was 1 year old. And my parents thought that was a normal thing for kids to start playing, because they're first-time parents. So they decided to put me in piano lessons. It took a couple years because who's trying to really teach a 1 year old how to play piano? So I began formal lessons when I was about 4 years old.
That is very young. What was it about the piano? Was it something you heard a recording? Or did your dad play? Was the piano in the house? What attracted you to it?
I think it was just the piano was in the house. We had an upright spinet in our living room, and my father played a bit, and my mother played a bit. But we always listened to music, so I don't really know if it was specifically piano that I gravitated towards. It was just an instrument that I can be creative on, and it was the one that was around. We had a guitar, but it was an electric guitar, and we didn't have all the parts to plug it into amps or anything like that. So piano, I guess, was really the vehicle that was available that I could be creative on. So I think it was really by chance.
And did your parents listen to music at home?
All the time. My mother was a fan of classical music and also country western music. She loved Charlie Pride, Ray Charles. My father listened to jazz. My father was a jazz head. He listened to everything from Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk to Alex Bugnon and Jeff Lorber. Like really the range of it. He just played. He loved music. Aside from that, we listened to Motown, we listened to gospel music in the house. We listened to R&B, Otis Redding, Marvin Gaye, a lot of Marvin Gaye and Al Green in the house. James Brown, funk music, Parliament Funkadelic. So there was a lot of music going on in the house.
Yeah, what a great environment to grow up in. Now, I seem to remember your brother plays as well.
Yes, he does. He's a fantastic drummer and teacher, and he's 5 years younger than me. But when he came along, it was great because I finally get to make music with someone, and who better to make music than your brother. When he started playing drums, I think he started when he was about 3 as well, 3 or 4. Before that, of course, pots and pans, but we got him a little drum set, a small little drum set, and he began on that, and he was killing it ever since then.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what were the recordings that you listened to? You started playing the piano at a very young age. There was a lot of diverse music in your household, from jazz to country to Motown. What were your first recordings that you started to play over and over again?
Funny enough, my first recording was Thelonious Monk's It's actually a Thelonious Monk and Oliver Nelson collaboration. Oliver Nelson Big Band. I believe it's called Let's Cool One. I think that's the album. And that was the first recollection of a jazz record that I heard which is really interesting because Oliver Nelson has a certain sound and Monk has a totally different sound, but to hear them together, that was my first. That was me identifying with what jazz really was. Thelonious Monk. Then it was Kind of Blue. It was also Grover Washington Jr.'s All My Tomorrows. And I believe it was, we had a lot of compilation albums too, or compilation tapes. My father was always listening to things, so he would always, have a tape recorder and just record his favorite songs. So we had a lot of compilation tapes of just random artists, from Ahmad Jamal to Joe Sample, so we had a lot of different sounds on those tapes as well.
Yeah. Now, were you conscious of the fact that the key element in jazz was improvisation?
I wasn't, really. I mean, to me, I didn't think of it as improvisation. I just thought of it as creative freedom. And growing up, hearing that music, and also growing up with a household that encourages creativity, I thought that that's how music was supposed to be. So early on, when I started classical piano, I would always solo or improv on classical pieces. And my teachers would be frustrated because they would tell me, play what's on the page, play what Bach played or play what Mozart played, play what they wrote. And I would do that, but then I'd also, go through the keys and take it different places. And which led to an instructor that I had finally getting fed up, really, and just saying, I think he should go to jazz studies. So formal jazz studies I started at 7 years old, but the idea of improvisation, going to being a part of the gospel church, that's also improvisation. You're having a call and response between people. You don't really know what's going to happen. So my whole life was that. So having specific structure didn't really resonate with me because I always grew up with improvisation. I always grew up with being in the moment and moving in different ways depending on what happens. So, that idea of it being called improvisation, I didn't really think of it that way.
Was your first jazz teacher, so to speak, someone who schooled you in the art of improvisation? And did he or she pull your coat to who the serious jazz pianists were? You mentioned you got turned on to Monk. That's a very famous, fantastic big band recording with Oliver Nelson. Did your piano teacher point you in the direction of any other mentors?
Not really. I mean, the wonderful thing, I studied with Rex Cadwallader, a wonderful teacher. Thinking back on it, he was actually a composer. He was actually a composer in classical and jazz genres, and actually anything. And so, which actually I appreciate that he was my teacher, because someone like him, he never told me, oh, well, you should check out the way so and so solos. His thing was he pushed my own creativity. And I would bring things to him. I'd bring him records. I'd say, okay, well, I like this guy here. Who is this? And he'd sit me down like, oh, that's Ahmad Jamal. And let's go through it. What do you like about him? So he would ask me what I liked. And so he really helped me develop the toolbox that I had on an early age of just learning the music, learning the history, giving me different songs to learn. My father was someone who was a person of just research, and he loved music. So if he heard a song that he liked, he would ask me if I liked it. And if I said yes, then he would ask my teacher, hey, can you teach that to him? Or let's learn about it. So one of the first songs I learned was Take Five. And I learned that not from the album Time Out, but I believe it was a Cadillac commercial at the time. So I think they used parts of the music for, I think it was Cadillac. And, watching TV, I really liked the sound of that. So I learned how to play it on my own. And bringing it to my teacher, he knew the record. He knows Dave Brubeck. He knows Paul Desmond. So he sat me down and brought the record out. He's like, well, this is where this comes from. And he let me have it, So thanks to Rex for just allowing me to just be free.
Yeah, well, shout out to Rex for encouraging you but not overwhelming you. I think
definitely
sometimes teachers in their joy that they get from the music sometimes overwhelm young students. Well, you got to hear this, you got to hear that, and then all of a sudden it becomes like overwhelmed. But it sounds like you had a very organic process into the music.
Yeah, very much so. There was, I didn't really use books. There were no theory books that I used. Everything was very much from the word of mouth. Everything was from hearing it. Of course, you're working on reading and composing and the theory later on, but the development of just hearing music, that came from just being in it. That came from playing in church whenever I got the chance to do so, or going to the jam sessions and listening and sitting there, and then finally being asked, hey, do you want to play? And then we play something. I might not know the tune, but I have big ears, so let's do it anyway. And I still work that way. I give my bandmates, I don't give them music, which unless they absolutely need it, but I like to teach it to them organically, because I feel like that's the best way to learn the music, is to really get the feel, really get the way that I am coming to the music, and also how they're coming to the music, and then we're making something together.
Yeah, when you say that, it brings to mind Charles Mingus, because when Mingus would bring in music, he didn't write it out. He taught it to the musicians, one or two phrases at a time.
Exactly.
And I think, the music really benefited from that. Mingus was just an incredible figure as a bassist, as a leader, as a writer, and everything in the music. And his groups were famous. He called it the Jazz Workshop. In essence, It was, an ongoing thing to develop the music. So I got to ask you, it's rare to find someone that young who was motivated to practice. Did you practice because you wanted to get better? What was it that drove you at that point, man?
It was wanting to get better, but also just to explore what the instrument and the music did. I love being creative. I loved drawing and painting and sculpting. I love photography. I love, anything to do with art. I loved it. So with the piano, it was something that there was a curiosity there of like, what does this actually do? And then hearing the music and then watching videos of Herbie Hancock playing, or watching videos of or hearing Art Tatum. Like when I first found out about Art Tatum, I was like, oh, I got to be able to do that. I got to figure out, how do I do that? And not necessarily to repeat it, but just because that is a possibility that exists. So how do I get there? How can I exist in that era, in that realm, or surpass that? Can I do that? So everything was just about curiosity and what can I do?
Yeah. You reminded me of Hank Jones once told me that the first, he was like someplace and someone was playing a record in the other room and it was Art Tatum. And he said to his friend, he said, "Who are those two pianists?"
Right, right, exactly. I mean, the first time I heard him, I thought it was probably 4 or 5 people. And then I found out it was one man. And I was like, okay, well, if he can do it, then I can do it.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, I think of this whole thing as a process. It's like you never quite get there. Gary Bartz once said to me, he said that, like, this is when he was around 70. I think he's 75 now. He said, I need another lifetime just to learn to keep working on this music. Because,
exactly.
You really can't get it. And when I think of two masters who practice all the time, one is Sonny Rollins, one is Michael Brecker. Even though I said to Michael Brecker once, I said, you're a master. Why do you got to keep practicing hours a day? He said, you're never a master.
Right, that is it. You're never ever a master. This is a music that has existed long before you, and it's going to exist long after you. And really, it's just the exploration of self-expression. And you're constantly learning new things, and the music reflects that. So it's never going to be completely mastered ever, because you're living your life. You're living your life day to day. So every day is something different.
Yeah. Could you play something for us before we continue with the interview?
Sure. I can play something for you. I'll play something.
Christian just played George Gershwin's "Someone to Watch Over Me." That's written in 1926, really part of the Great American Songbook. Sonny Rollins, who always quotes from the Great American Songbook in his solos, he grew up at a time when that music was played on the radio, and when he went to the movies every Saturday, it was in the movies. My question for you, Mr. Sands, is that music, that Great American Songbook stuff, is really not part of the scene. How did you get into it? Did you study it? What turned your ear onto the Great American Songbook?
Well, there's a reason why we call it the Great American Songbook. It's something that reflected the popular culture in America at that time. And, a lot of these songs come from shows. A lot of these songs come from film. But a lot of these songs, there's a nostalgia to it. There's this beauty to it. There's something that is there for everyone involved. So when you have songs written by Gershwin, in order to compose and play, you have to learn what the masters and the originators have done, and you also have to know where some of these things come from. So I love learning that. I love playing that because there's so much information there. It's things that I can pull from and experiment with that were created for a reason. These things were created to embody emotion. They were created to embody a certain type of emotion. These chord changes here, or the way this cadence is from here to here. There's something that happens that these composers have studied or have learned or have listened to. And for me, that's all just free information. That's something to borrow from. That's something to learn from. So, playing the Great American Songbook is something that I love to do because there's always something new to learn.
Yeah. Well, certainly that music is an important part of the jazz tradition. Those standards, along with our jazz standards, become part of the repertoire. And it's been said that music really reflects the times. Sadly, we do not hear very much of contemporary music as part of the jazz repertoire. Why do you think that is?
Well, honestly, I think it's because people don't play other people's compositions. I think it's just point blank. That's what it is. Because, these were songs that were played, and then everyone played them at a certain point. Everyone put their own spin on these compositions. Whether we're talking about American Songbook, whether we're talking about compositions, by Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock. For me, those are composers of the Great American Songbook as well, because they're great Americans and they've created this music that we love. They created music that is the background of American history. So nowadays, everyone composes, but no one wants to play anybody else's compositions. Why? I'm not really sure, but I love playing composition. I love playing compositions by anybody. My thing is, if it's good music, it's good music, and it should be played. And now everyone is working on their own things, but which are beautiful. But I think it's time to come together and learn each other's compositions, because it's something that creates the music. It creates a soundtrack to humanity. And I think that because the time we're in, where everything is so spread out, and we're so connected, but at the same time we're so spread out and we're so individualistic. I believe that if we start playing each other's tunes, then we'll really be able to connect on a different level.
Yeah. I think there's another factor here as well. And one of our viewers, Paul McKendrick over in the UK, commented the melodies were so strong. You don't get that movement anymore. And I would say up until like 20 years ago, songs from Broadway shows and songs by pop artists were shared by artists in other dimensions. But the popular music today, which is primarily hip-hop music and what I call technology-generated music, doesn't really have those strong melodies. I mean, can you, in your playing, Christian, can you think of anything written in the past 10 years that you play?
Yeah. I tell, one of my favorite records is Rihanna's record, Anti. That came out, I believe, what was it, 3 years ago, maybe? Something like that. What I love about it is the melody. I love how it's very angular and it's very tricky. And the thing about it is that it's subtle. There's a subtlety to it where you don't really realize what it's doing. You take someone like Kendrick Lamar with his rhythm, his rhythmic sense, and the things that he's doing and how he's doing it. I mean, there's a lot that's happening. I mean, there's a plethora of music that doesn't stimulate every aspect of your mind, but then there's some that are. So you really got to find which ones that do that. I mean, strong melodies have existed before, and it's not even about, for me, it's not even about strong melodies, because not only just about strong melody. I mean, like now we have strong rhythms. Now we have, I mean, they might be, laying on one note, for example, but rhythmically, what's happening? So there's different. For me, there's different things to pull from, not just a strong melody. There is the rhythm, there is the harmony aspect of it, there is the texture aspect of it. If so and so is rapping or singing, then what's happening underneath? Is it just the music, or are they answering themselves, or are they passing the buck to somebody else? Like there's an interaction there that is very creative, but not new, because they're also borrowing it from the things that we've learned. You take a lot of hip hop from the 90s. I mean, it was borrowed from jazz music. They're sampling Ahmad Jamal, they're sampling Errol Garner, they're sampling Count Basie, and then Ron Carter. You talk about. So you talk about the melodies. The melody might not be sung by the lead, but the melodies are definitely embedded into the framework of the music.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to maintain an open mind. As we pass through this life, the music of our youth that we listen to in our teenagers is very strong. That becomes like a standard in a way. But the truth is, we keep changing, and the culture keeps changing, and the music keeps changing. And just because we don't initially hear it, we shouldn't write it off. We've got to keep our ears open.
Exactly, because you never really know. I mean, there's definitely people that I've heard, and I was like, all right, I'm not, it's cool. But then I heard the entire album. That's kind of how I came to love someone like Kendrick Lamar. I heard a song called Swimming Pools, and I was like, all right, that's cool. But then I heard the actual album, and that album, and actually all of his albums, you have to listen to from the beginning to the end, because it's like starting a book in the middle of the book. It's like opening to page 187. You're not going to understand what's been going on here. And he's a perfect example of that, because I had to listen to everything to understand why Swimming Pools was such an interesting song. So now, I mean, creatively, it's a little different, because people are no longer doing the singular song. This is going to be the best song, and this is now people are kind of putting these things together as packages, as package deals. So now you might have a single because that, can get you money or get you some notoriety or something. But when you listen to the entire record, it's actually really, really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is about change that happens in music. I was around back in the fusion days when Miles first came out with first In a Silent Way and then Bitches Brew. And I mean, that was explosive. But there were some people who were kind of in the old school who said, no, you shouldn't use electric instruments, and you shouldn't borrow from those influences. Just like when in the early 40s, when Bird and Diz started playing bebop, people said that's not jazz. Or in the 60s, when some critics, some writers said Coltrane was anti-jazz. So as we said before, we got to keep an open mind. I wanted to ask you, do you write as well?
Every day.
And what is the impetus for writing? Do you write based on a deadline, or do you just, well, you mentioned every day. So is that how it is? You just write stuff and then it develops over a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, it's really inspired by anything. I mean, yeah, you have your deadlines, but I don't write for deadlines. I write just because I love doing it. I love exploring my own mind. I love trying different things. I love learning different things and figuring out places to use them. When we're talking about just composers, I mean, like I said before, I'm always coming up with something. I'm constantly improvising. I'm constantly trying to push myself intellectually and trying to push myself musically. And you only do that by creating and you writing. And listening and researching and trying different things. So I do it every single day. And it could be inspired by a conversation. It could be inspired by something that I've read, that I've, watched on television, heard on television, or the radio. I mean, you talk about today and the social change that we're trying to come by today. That is inspiration enough for writing. That reflects the writing reflects everything that's going on in our lives. So and that's what we love about music, specifically jazz, because I always say that jazz is the reflection of the human spirit, and it reflects every aspect of it: the good, the bad, the tension, the release, the happiness, the sadness, the love, the hate. I mean, there's so many different aspects of humanity that jazz and jazz composition and jazz improvisation reflect.
Could you play us one of your original compositions?
Sure. This is called Song of the Rainbow People. It came out on my last record, Facing Dragons, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, it was beautiful, man. Song of the Rainbow People. When I hear those words put together, Rainbow People, I think about life on this planet and how it really should be. We should be all together, even though we are different shades of the rainbow. And
Exactly.
I love the way that the music reflected that. And what you were saying before about music reflecting what's happening in this world, excuse me, I think back to the 60s, the civil rights movement. There was a song, well, there were several songs that, theme song, so to speak. One was, I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free. A song written by a man who was a mentor to both Christian Sands and myself. I speak of Billy Taylor, and we can't do an interview here with Christian Sands without talking a little bit about Billy. How did you meet Billy? How did you become involved with him musically, Christian?
Thanks to Rex Cadwallader, who we mentioned earlier. He heard about the Jazz in July summer program that was happening in Amherst, Massachusetts, and he suggested that I go and study with Dr. Billy Taylor. It was a 2-week-long program, but we wanted to check it out first, so we were like, well, we'll just do a week. And upon being a part of the program, enrolling in the program, and going, I got the chance to meet him. And I still remember we were in the Byzantium Auditorium, and he came down the stairs in his big glasses, and he had this like lime green button-down shirt, these khaki pants on. And he sat on the stage and just delivered the welcome speech. And he had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was very good at that. And fast forward later on in the day, we had our first lesson. It was a group lesson. And I learned so much from that first day. You know, I learned about the history of the music. I learned about the history of the piano, you know, and not even just well, this is stride piano, and this is this, and this is that. It wasn't even a stylistic thing. It was just the way he played was the history of the piano, you know, the development of jazz piano. So after studying with him for the entire week, he asked me to stay on for the second week, and so I did. And the rest is really history after that. I mean, we hit it off, and I became his protege. So anywhere he was going, I tried to go with him. I would carry his bags for him. I would carry his music for him. We would talk about it in his car. You know, we would. I'd go to his house and study with him. We would go to William Patterson's, where we met Mulgrew Miller. Well, I met Mulgrew Miller. He introduced me to so many different great musicians, and you know, it's something that I will cherish for for the rest of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. I mean, Billy was not only a remarkable musician, but he was a remarkable person as well. You hit upon that when you said that he had the ability to make someone feel like they were the only person in the room. And I was with Billy at a number of jazz conferences. There used to be an educational organization called IAJE. They would have these mega conferences. And I would sometimes help Billy out in his booth. And there'd be a long line. It was like almost like a political candidate. You know, there'd be a long line of people who like wanted to talk to him. And he was able to spend time with everyone, look them in the eye, and make them feel important. And, you know, so that quality also transferred into his communications ability being a broadcaster. Because that's how I first met Billy Taylor on the radio when I was 13 or 14 years old in West Hartford, Connecticut. He did a jazz show on WNEW AM on Saturdays. And I used to have my old AM radio, and I would like move it around, you know, because it was like 100 miles away. And I was just getting into jazz, and here was this warm, really cool guy who, you know, he was like the first jazz musician I heard who spoke. I knew I was a young trumpeter. I knew the music of Dizzy Gillespie and Lee Morgan and Maynard Ferguson. But hearing Billy on the radio, that was the first time I really focused on the humor, the love, the knowledge that he had, that he was able to communicate so well. And he was a broadcaster for many years on WLIB, and then made the jump to NPR, and also did the CBS Sunday Morning features on there for a number of years, and it introduced a lot of people to the music. And certainly, I wouldn't be the jazz video guy if it wasn't for Billy Taylor, because after I finished with Jazz Central Station, I started doing websites for musicians, and I got hooked up with Billy through Alan Bergman, who was Billy's lawyer at the time, and I ended up working with Billy and doing websites and started to shoot video with him. And Billy was like really encouraging, and he had this box. You may remember this in his little office there. There was a closet, and it was like full of content. He had like all kinds of stuff in there, and so he had these boxes of videos. And he took out one of the boxes and he gave it to me and he said, "Here, see what you can do with this." And I ended up, you know, putting up some of those videos on. That was the basis of the Jazz Video Guy channel back in 2006. And he was just like really, really encouraging. And also, I did some interviews with him about his documenting his life, because he spanned so many different eras in jazz. And like you were his protege, so to speak, Art Tatum and Billy had like a similar relationship on 52nd Street, where Billy would go around with him and help him, because Art Tatum was blind, although he had some sight. He could see a little bit. So I find it interesting, Art Tatum, Billy Taylor, Christian Sands. Yeah.
I mean, and that's part of the reason for me saying that he was the history of the jazz piano, because when you come from that lineage, not only just Art Tatum, you're talking about Teddy Wilson, you're talking about Willie the Lion Smith, James P. Johnson, Duke Ellington. There's so many pianists that he was around. Thelonious Monk, a young Thelonious Monk, and then every pianist after that. He was friendly with these pianists. They shared information. So by the time it came to me, I was just happy to be in the room. I was just happy to sit down and watch him work and listen to him and listen to what he played, because that was the school by itself. That was the lesson. Was just listening to him play, and then listening to him talk about Errol Garner, listening to him talk about Earl Hines, listening to him talk about John Coltrane and Miles, and you name it. We had conversations about it. We had conversations about the Roots, John Legend. There was so many different things that he was just into. And such a beautiful person to speak with about those things. It wasn't just music. We would talk about art. We would talk about fashion. We would talk about where he got his glasses from. There's so many different things that we spoke of, and so many different creative things that he's exposed me to, or just encouraged me to find out what they were.
Yeah. Yeah, we made reference to the importance of having an open mind. He was someone who would always listen to new people. He was very encouraging of young musicians. But to close that out here on the Billy segment, he had so many dimensions as a person, as a broadcaster, as a creator. We sometimes overlook. The man was a fantastic pianist. He knew his way around on the piano. From being part of that, the whole world that he came out of. Washington, D.C. in the 30s, and, to New York and bebop, and playing with Ella Fitzgerald. Just incredible. So this month, July 24th, marks the 99th anniversary of Billy's birth. So I'm glad we had a chance to speak about him today, because maybe some people who are watching this don't really know Billy. So Christian and I both encourage you. There's a lot of video and a lot of music. Billy Tiller is very accessible. Please check him out. But I want to finish out the program here talking about what you're doing today, your music, your recordings, your group. First of all, I think you have a trio right now. Who are you working with?
Yeah, it's Yasushi Nakamura on bass and Clarence Penn on drums. We have so much fun playing. We miss it, of course. The pandemic. Everybody's home now, and we miss each other. But we're always talking to each other. Almost every day, every other day. And I love those guys. I love playing. I love making music with them. It's so fun, but it's so freeing at the same time. We just recorded a record a couple months ago, last year, and it should be released July 17th. So it's going to be a lot of fun, man. And
what is the name of that recording? And how did you put it together? Is it thematic or just tracks? How'd you do that?
So the record is called Be Water, and it is actually inspired by so many different things, but specifically one of my biggest inspirations, which is Bruce Lee. And it comes from his a quote that he says, I don't want to give it away because I want you to buy the record. But the album is about being flexible with pressure. You have pressures of everyday life. You have pressures of, just being an individual, just being an artist, you have pressure from your job, your spouse maybe, and how do you deal with that in a positive way? How are you flexible enough to move in moments that you need to? And that's what it means to be water, be like water. Water can take the shape of anything, so nothing is in its way. And so that whole concept, I really resonated with, and so I wanted to make a record out of that. And so that's what this is. I mean, we have some amazing musicians on there. We have Sean Jones, Steve Davis, Marcus Strickland, again, who I absolutely am a fan of, Marvin Sewell on guitar, and I'm playing piano, Fender Rhodes, organ, keyboards. There's a lot of different sounds, and I'm also, it's inspired by film as well. I'm a film buff. I love Quentin Tarantino, so it kind of has that element of drama. I love drama. I love film. I love telling the full story. So again, this is one of those things where you have to listen to it from beginning to end.
Yeah. So Be Water on Mack Avenue Records, what did you say, July 19th?
17th.
17th, okay. And I'm sure it'll be on iTunes and Spotify and all over the place in this time when it's extremely difficult to sell music. Because of the way that technology has changed the world, the music world in particular, and also because how there are so many different options for one's leisure time. There has never been a time in the history of humankind when there was so much content available.
Yes.
Kind of mind-boggling. But for a number of years, a lot of musicians I know make a living from playing gigs. And unfortunately, we are in a space right now where you can't play live gigs. So those of us who know what it's like to be with musicians in a room, hearing live music, having them perform, the excitement of that, the magic of that, the healing of that, we have been denied this by the current situation. And our musician friends are denied the ability to create, but also to make a living. So I must ask you, my friend, how are you surviving during these crazy times?
Well, again, it's like I said, be water. You have to adjust. You have to figure out different ways to live and to get by. So luckily, I love challenges. And this is just a challenge to overcome and a challenge to figure out. And I'm figuring it out, whether it's teaching, I've been doing some teaching lately, whether it's instructing, whether it's doing interviews. I mean, I started a web series as well called Welcome to the Sands Box, sponsored by Monterey Jazz Festival. So I've been doing that lately, which has been so much fun. Interviewing just fellow musicians and friends, so I'm staying busy. I'm extremely busy. I mean, a lot of the things, the performance aspect of it has been shifted, but I'm still trying to remain visible and accessible to the people that I wish to see. I wish to see the fans. So I'm doing more things online. I'm doing listening sessions online on my social medias. I'm doing deep dives of analysis of different records so we can all stay connected, and just listening to things that I want to listen to, listening to things that, the fans, you guys want to listen to, so it's not exactly making a living, but it is still positive and productive works. And I think until we figure out what's going on, we still have to be productive. We still have to have the conversations that we need to have. We still need to move forward, and we can't let this beat us. So, we have to just, take the bull by the horns, as they say, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to be proactive in these times, because it's very easy, given the current situation, to just be, wow, what do I do next? I mean, I sometimes, in the beginning, the first month of the quarantine, I'd wake up, I'd say, what day is this? I mean, just trying to...
Oh, I'm still the same way.
Trying to put it together. We got a question here from one of our viewers. Open Song is his ID. He asks, can we have a most like own albums from Christian? Let me translate that into English. Which of your recordings would you like people to hear?
Well, now the newest one. This is coming out. I don't know if you can see this. I actually have it right here. Trying to get that little. Yeah, this is the newest one. July 17th. You can pre-order it now. There are some songs already available. We've been releasing them. If you don't have them, we've been releasing them. Doing singles, so they are available. I think we have four now. And then also the other records. The great thing too about this new record is we're doing, of course, we printed this also on vinyl. So if we have any vinyl heads, LP heads, it's great. And there's a little surprise when you open up the vinyl too. I don't want to give it away, but I'm always trying to be creative and create an experience with my music, whether it's the packaging or whether it's something inside or whether it's, especially now because you can't come see me and I can't come see you, but I still want to make an impact. So, check out the record. Check out the tunes that are already available. Check out the past records that I've done. Check out the music that I'm also featured on. I've been recording up until this point. I've been recording on a whole bunch of different records too. So Jerome Jennings, The Beast. Check that record out. If you're a fan of, the School of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, that record is for you. There's countless others I've been producing as well. So Jordan Patay, First Fruit. It's a beautiful mix of jazz and gospel music. And she's a wonderful saxophonist that I've gotten to know throughout the years, and she's absolutely incredible. Just listen to me. Follow me on social media. I'm always posting things up. I'm always doing different things. So just check me out.
Well, you mentioned something that sparked something here. I got to fix this here. 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that. You said you're into films. You mentioned Quentin Tarantino. Pardon me. Do you watch the channel Turner Classic Movies? I
do.
Did you do something with them recently?
I recently did. I did a few 2 nights of jazz and film with Eddie Muller, and it was so much fun. It was great to talk about these films that I've watched, some films that I didn't know about and I had to do some research on, but it was absolutely fantastic. I had such a great time.
And what were the films that you guys talked about? You introduced the films. You had a little discussion before the film with him, right?
Yeah. So the first set of films, we did the Glenn Miller story, the Gene Krupa story, and Benny Goodman film that was just absolutely phenomenal because Benny Goodman is in it acting, and it's so great to see him in that role. He's so incredible. And then the second part of it was film from the 60s. So we talked about Elevator to the Gallows, which features the soundtrack written by Miles Davis. It's a French film. We talked about the Warped Ones. It's a Japanese film, 1960, which is really, really cool, really, really abstract. I really love that film. And we talked about, I'm trying to think now, I've done so much since then. I've been watching so many films since then. A Knife in the Water, Roman Polanski's first film. Yeah. And which is great. Roman Polanski, we love Roman Polanski. So, I love film, man.
Yeah. Well, I have kind of a pet peeve about Hollywood films that purport to tell a story about jazz musicians.
Yes.
The first problem I have is that when we have musicians, when we have actors on the screen playing music, we know they're not playing music. They're pretending. So immediately for me, that I lose the truth there. The element of believability is destroyed. The second thing is most and I hate to say this, but it's true, most of the Hollywood films with stories about jazz musicians have been very negative. Very few films have captured the joy of playing the music, the remarkable relationships between the musicians, the humor, the way musicians communicate with each other. Most of the films, for example, the Gene Krupa story. What was the focus on in the Gene Krupa story? Not only was he was a great drummer, but the story of him getting busted, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it didn't exactly go into further detail of him getting busted, but I mean, they took some liberties with the story a little, but Gene Krupa was heavily involved in that, to the point where he taught the main character, the actor, I'm blanking on his name.
Sal Mineo.
Yes, Sal Mineo. He taught him drums. Sal was sitting with Gene Krupa, learning how to play these drums. Because when you watch Sal play, I mean, there's moments where you're like, okay, he's mimicking, but then there's things where he does where you're like, okay, that's actually really hard to do, to mimic.
Yeah.
And so what I liked about those films is that these actors really sat with these musicians to really try to figure it out. I mean, James Stewart tried to figure out how to play trombone. He was bad at it, which is why they had someone else play it. But he sat and he tried to figure it out. He tried to study it, as much as he can, against learning his craft, which is acting,
Yeah.
But jazz film, I mean, Hollywood is Hollywood. I mean, there's things that are missing all the time. I mean, just given given the time that we've American history. But the beautiful thing is that since we see things missing, it's up to us to really give the real story. So so I'm looking forward to the next jazz story, and hopefully it's better than the last one. We have to keep pushing it. We have to keep getting to a point where we are satisfied with the truth of the music, the truth of the story, and it's something that it's something that unfortunately has just begun. So we're at the beginning of it, but we just got to keep fighting. We got to keep fighting for what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, not a perfect film, but a film that I think captured jazz most honestly, and also musicians played in the film, was Round Midnight. Making Dexter, the center of the film, because he's a pretty dramatic character to begin with, the way that he spoke, the way that he carried himself, and the other musicians in the film. But we got a little bit of the interplay. Because when I was a kid from Connecticut, and I would come to New York, and I would come to the Vanguard, and finally I moved, and I used to hang out in the kitchen of the Vanguard, and it was such a cool place to be because, as I mentioned, the interplay between the musicians. Round Midnight captured some of that, but I like your optimism about movies and life in general, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me today. We've kind of burned through an hour. I feel as if we could talk a lot more. I'd love to talk to you more about movies. I watch Turner Classic Movies all the time. That's one of my favorite channels. And I must ask you, do you like the films of Martin Scorsese?
Of course. Absolutely.
Well, Martin Scorsese was my teacher in film school.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, so you know what you're talking about then.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very lucky to go to NYU Film School and study with him at the time. That's the subject of another program. So we can't say when you'll be appearing, but do you have any, in terms of the content you're producing, is any of it scheduled? Does any of it appear on the web on a regular basis, or is it just catch as catch can?
You just got to catch it. But I'm trying to be more vocal on my social media. So if people are following me there on Facebook or Instagram, I try anything that's coming up. I place there. I post everything, So if you want to catch anything, or if you're curious about anything, I'm always posting the next thing I'm going to be doing in advance. So, you just got to stay tuned. You just got to subscribe to things. You have to, turn your notifications on and just be ready.
Is there any one platform where people are more likely to get Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube? What's the number one place people should follow you?
For now, Instagram. Instagram is the number one place to follow me. Facebook, unfortunately, has caps. So, if you get to a certain amount of friends, you can't accept anymore. So it kind of gets a little tricky. But Instagram and Twitter are just free. So, please follow me there. My Instagram, Christian Sands Jazz. Twitter, Christian Sands 1, the number 1. And you can follow me there. And, yeah, write to me. I'd love to. If I can get through everything, I'll try to get back to you, when I can. But I'm always posting there. So.
Okay. Well, one of the bright lights on the jazz piano horizon. It's just played for us and shared part of his life, Christian Sands. Yesterday, I focused on Mulgrew Miller, and Christian's part of that same thing. The jazz piano tradition. Incredible tradition. Been a fascinating week, I'm sure. Monday, Nicholas Payton, the outspoken trumpeter, will be our guest. And who knows what's going to happen. So thanks for watching. Please stay healthy, stay safe, and have a fantastic